Senator Ted Cruz went on to Breaking Point to talk about Israel and Hamas. Now, I've seen a lot of crazy commentary from Republican senators and legislators on this war. Seen Mitch McConnell talking about flattening Gaza. I think Tom Cotton said that they need to bounce the rubble in Gaza. I've seen Jesse Waters on Fox News putting into question the concept of Palestinian civilians, how they're all anti-Semitic Jew haters, so what can you expect? And the rhetoric has been just absolutely awful. So having somebody in the room with Ted Cruz to challenge him directly on much of the same rhetoric, I think it's going to be interesting. I want to see how far he goes, knowing that he'll be pressed on that type of rhetoric and the type of questions that, honestly, I'm focusing on Ryan Grimm here, who works with The Intercept, on the type of questioning that Ryan Grimm puts Ted Cruz through, because this is a really good opportunity, and they only got 18 minutes, so let's see what they can do.
Well, we're joined now by Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, who's also the author of the new book. It's called Unwoke: How to Defeat Cultural Marxism in America. You can see it.
Whoa, okay, let me pause it. Let me pause this quick. If anybody wants to screenshot the stream or somebody write down Unwoke: How to Defeat Cultural Marxism in America. I just want to pause it in case anybody in my audience wants to go and get this book for their parents for the holidays, or your kids. I bet your kids, oh, mommy, please get me Unwoke. Please get me Unwoke. I don't know. But, I just wanted to give you guys that opportunity to go get it. Unwoke, how to defeat God. Yeah, Ted Cruz is going to know how to defeat cultural Marxism. Okay.
It up on your screen right now. Senator Cruz, thank you so much for joining us here on Counterpoints.
It's great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
All right, so I want to start with a question that you've probably heard from critics. You were on Bill Maher recently on the left over the course of the last couple of months. The book
Wait,
from Bill Maher.
Look, there's a book about Lenin in the same room as Ted Cruz. He's out of his environment, man. He's out of his environment.
Recently on the left over the course of the last couple of months. The book is called Unwoke, again, as we just mentioned. And I'm curious, for example, when Elon Musk banned From the River to the Sea on Twitter, is that an example, or what do you say to critics who would argue that's an example of conservative wokeness? Do you support banning that from Twitter?
Look, I don't support banning really anything. I believe in free speech, and I think that there's a
smart start, smarter than I expected.
Real difference. It's one of the things I talk about in the book between the left and the right. The approach of the radical left, the approach of the cultural Marxists, is to use power and force and coercion to silence voices they disagree with. And
what he just described is just how all authoritarians. Wow, the bad guys, the woke, what do they use? Power, force, and coercion. Can you guys think of a single dictatorship authoritarian that you couldn't use to describe their tactics using the same words? Hitler used power, force, and coercion. Pinochet used power, force, and coercion. Stalin used power, force, and coercion. Every type of authoritarian would use power, force, and coercion. It's just such an uninteresting statement. They use power, force, and coercion. Republicans have used power, force, and coercion. Democrats have used power, force, and coercion. Just an uninteresting. Yeah, that political force uses power. Oh wow, you're breaking some new political ground here. Sorry, God, I couldn't imagine. What is that book, like 200 pages? How do you fill 200 pages of that?
By and large, conservatives, we're not looking to silence the left. I don't want to see Bernie Sanders or...
The candidate that is running for office for the Republicans has actively called for people who burn the American flag to go in prison, despite a Supreme Court decision saying that it was constitutional speech, constitutionally protected speech. Donald Trump is somebody who actively wants to loosen up, his words, the libel laws. I don't know, man. I don't know.
AOC silence. Frankly, I want to have people hear what they say more because it's so idiotic. Look, I agree with John Stuart Mill. The best cure for bad speech is more speech. And so But at the same time, we need to understand the reason I wrote this book is what has happened in America. Look, millions of Americans across this country are looking at the state of the nation going, what the heck happened to the country we love? And what has happened is every major institution in America has been captured by the radical left. And what this book does is it explains that. And each chapter in the book focuses on a different...
What I don't know what he means by that. When he says radical left, like there are certain notions that companies have adopted that have been viewed as left-wing culturally. For example, wanting to have proportional hiring in your company and trying to do hires in order to try to create those proportions. Some people call them diversity hires. Like I could like view and say, oh, that's something that left-wing scholars more generally have wanted, you know, affirmative actions. Like there's certain things like that I could see where I'm kind of understanding what he's saying. But when he says radical left domination of these companies, when I hear radical left, I'm thinking like Pol Pot. I'm thinking like Stalin, man. I'm thinking Lenin. I'm not thinking some blue-haired barista. I'm thinking mass purges and famine, you know, the real OGs of communism. That's what I'm thinking when he says radical left. I'm thinking the boys, man. It's the boys. But there are no boys around. It's just like, it's just going to be like affirmative action or, oh, they have pronouns in their company. That's not radical left. You want to know why there's no radical left management as Disney? Is because Disney is a capitalist company that wants to make as much money as physically possible as a function of them being capitalist, as a function of them being a company. So they can't be radical left, at least economically. So does he just mean culturally? And how much does that matter?
An institution. So it starts off with universities. I call universities the Wuhan lab of the woke virus. It's where it was created, it's where it mutated, it's where it spread. From universities, the book goes to K through 12 education, then to journalism, then to government, then to big business, then to big tech,
it's journalism,
then to entertainment, Hollywood, TV, movies, music, sports, then to science. And the last chapter in the book focuses on China, and I describe China as a central nexus that is intertwined with all of them. And what the book does is really two things. Number one...
Hello, I am Xi Jinping. He, him. Come on. Okay, sorry. Let me treat it with some seriousness.
It explains how and why these major institutions in America got captured by the radical left, but then even more importantly, it lays out a positive, proactive battle plan for how we take these institutions back. Because I think if we don't take the institutions back, we're going to lose our country.
The taking of these institutions back, though, sometimes seems to people like reverse cancel culture. Like my former colleague Glenn Greenwald has been, has become this kind of big supporter of the...
I wouldn't say that so chipper. I wouldn't be very happy to have him have been my colleague. But whatever. They're friends or what? I think they're friends or something. By the way, I like his tie. Nice tie.
The right's free speech kind of advocacy over the last several years. And I'm sure you've seen him recently. Yeah. He's been extremely disappointed with the way that the right has responded to the Israel-Palestine catastrophe. Like he wrote, for instance, conservatives pushing this safety rhetoric, which isn't due to violence but words, should either apologize to the minority groups they mocked all these years or realize they're suddenly endorsing such flamboyant victim narratives because a group they like is claiming it. So why hasn't there been more kind of public support for free speech in the last 6 weeks?
So look, I think free speech is the right approach, and I support free speech for everyone. I support it for radicals. I support it for leftists who hate me. I support free speech for Hamas. Now, I also support killing the terrorists so they can have free speech while they're in the grave. But
wow,
if you engage in acts of terrorism,
he's a very tough boy.
I emphatically support Israel's right to defend itself and its stated objective that they're going to eliminate Hamas. But when it comes to the U.S., actually what's happening in universities in particular is a powerful illustration of what I explain in this book. It is cultural Marxism. And you know, I've had lots of conversations in the last 2 months actually with.
I wish that every time a politician said something that's semi-bloodthirsty, there was like a mandatory like White House booper who went in there and like after saying like we're gonna bounce the rubble in Gaza, the mandatory booper comes in, boop, just to make them feel silly and to remind them just who they are. Still a suit at the end of the day. Not that badass. Remember who you are. Remember where you are. You're not doing the bombing.
With just several weeks ago, I was talking with a very successful Silicon Valley entrepreneur who's a man of the left. He's been a Democrat his whole life. And he was expressing complete bewilderment. Where is all of this vicious anti-Semitism on the left coming from? Whether it's in the squad in Congress or whether it's on college campuses. And I explained, I said, look, if you look at, and the book on woke explains this.
Can I be honest, man? If you see the squad and you see AOC and Ilhan Omar's and all the rest of these people rhetoric, and you say that's vicious, no, vicious anti-Semitism. What? Because of the all about the Benjamins thing from Ilhan? Vicious anti-Semitism? Bitch, scroll on Twitter for 24 hours on the For You page, and I promise you, you'll find more vicious anti-Semitism than that, okay? You'll get some pretty crazy ass Wojaks, a lot of big nose caricatures, a lot of K-words here, K-words there, a lot more than you're gonna get from, oh, hey, pro-Israel lobby groups have a lot of money and have a lot of influence, which is not only not that offensive, it is also true. Even if she said it in a way that can be interpreted as offensive through all about the Benjamins. Vague. But you guys get what I'm saying. Come on. A vicious anti-Semitism. Vicious anti-Semitism. The two things I'll hold them to is all about the Benjamins. Should have been workshopped. Okay. And the second thing is I've seen Rashida Tlaib reposting some misinformation around Gaza recently. But neither of those things would I describe as vicious anti-Semitism. But whatever.
Marxist started out with Karl Marx writing the Communist Manifesto, and he had a worldview that the world is in constant conflict, and it's in constant conflict between oppressors and victims. And Marx viewed things in a socioeconomic lens, and so the oppressors for Marx were the owners of capital, and the victims were the proletariat, the working men and women. And the solution that Marx advocated for was the violent revolution of the proletariat, of the victims, to overthrow the oppressors and use government to forcibly redistribute the wealth. Now, what I describe in the book is how Marxists, starting in the 1960s, began infiltrating the universities and becoming tenured professors, becoming administrators. And from there, we saw Marxism begin to mutate. It started off just plain vanilla Marxist. Then it mutated on other axes. So you had, for example...
I'm a cotton candy Marxist, for the record.
The same frame of oppressor-victim, but they shifted it to race. And that's where critical race theory came from. Same idea, constant battle, but based on races. They shifted it to gender and sexual orientation and gender identity. That's where things like queer theory came from. And what I explained to this fellow I was talking to is I said, look, what is happening is very simple. For the radical left, they have coded Jews as oppressors. And they have coded Palestinians as victims. And therefore, for cultural Marxists, they support the violent revolution of the so-called victims against the so-called oppressors. It is part of what's been indoctrinated. And you look at universities, at these leftists who are radically protesting in support of terrorists who are committing atrocities that are unspeakable. That is a manifestation of the sickness that has taken over our institutions.
Well, do you distinguish between opposition to Zionism and anti-Semitism, or do you believe that?
Okay, I don't know if I want to spend too much time talking about, the Marxist view of the Israel-Palestine conflict, because it's not as simple as he even describes it. There are actually many of the founding members of Israel, founding politicians of Israel, like Ben Gurion, were socialists. The Soviet Union was the first nation state to recognize Israel before the United States, before anyone else. It was Stalin's Soviet Union that did that. They later reversed course after Stalin croaked in his own piss. But it's not as simple as saying like, oh, the communists support the Palestinians because they're the oppressed, and the the capitalists support Israel because they're the oppressor. I don't think that's I think it's a simplification. I don't want to get into all the specifics around that. But do you just listen to the fucking word salad? The word salad he had to go through to try to connect wokeness in companies and like Disney and just the woke whatever, all the way from Disney all the way to supporting Hamas. Just listen to all, he wanted to connect all these issues all the way down, all the way around. These issues are so much more complicated. But I really like this pretty picture he's built. It's a good book. Does he go on shows like this often? Does he go on left-wing programs regularly? I didn't really know he went on left-wing programs. And I'm going to consider this a left-wing program solely. But, I mean, he's going to get a left-wing perspective, certainly, from Ryan Grimm.
Those are the same thing.
I think anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism.
What do you say to so many different Jewish groups who say that they are anti-Zionist?
So the ones that are radical leftist organizations that look, there are 50.
That's not true. there are very, very traditional rabbis who have been part of the communities, and the descendants have been part of the communities for a very, very long time, way before any of these college groups got involved or whatever, and that are not like super communist. They're just very traditional and have a different interpretation of the Torah. Just being an anti-Zionist doesn't make you an anti-Semite.
50 some odd Muslim nations on the face of the planet. There's one Jewish nation, the state of Israel.
Now, that doesn't mean that people, and I want to put this here because it's important that I do put this here. That doesn't mean people don't use Zionism as like a smokescreen. I'll listen to people and I can hear from the rhetoric when they're talking about Zionists and they're throwing in a lot of dog whistles, and it sounds like they're just using Zionist as a code word for Jew, and the way they're talking about the Zionist capital, the Zionist control of the banks, and I'm listening to them. And I was like, wait a second, this isn't... And I hear that rhetoric, and I'll see a lot of people wiggling their way into communities who are anti-Semites, into pro-Palestine commentaries and Twitter spaces and Twitter pages by toning down that rhetoric or switching out key words to try to be in that crowd. And that type of stuff needs to be called out. But all that aside... anti-Zionism is not necessarily anti-Semitic, even though there are a lot of course, anti-Semitic anti-Zionists.
The modern state of Israel was formed coming out of World War II, coming out of the wake of the Holocaust. And it was formed on the premise that never again means never again, that we would not allow 6 million Jews to be exterminated by genocidal racist maniacs. I think the Jewish people deserve to have a homeland. That is theirs. Israel was historically a Jewish nation going back thousands of years. I've walked in the city of David. I've walked on the streets where Jesus walked down the streets. And anti-Zionists, look, when you see leftists chanting from the river to the sea, that means from the Jordan River to the sea.
Okay, can I just throw this out here for a second? Way before, like just 300, 400, 500 years ago, the area that is now Israel was not comprised of the percentage of Jews that it was before. It was controlled by the Ottoman Empire for a very, very long time, and it was predominantly Muslim. There were other minorities like Druze, and there were Christians, and there were some Jews, but they did not make up the majority. They did not. They had not made up the majority for a very, 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 very long time. But there had been a small contingents of Jews for a long time in places like Jerusalem. And once everything started to, kick off the whole Zionist project, many of the other Jews in the Middle East, expelled from Morocco, expelled from these other locations, would then make up what is the modern state of Israel. But until the Zionist project really went underway in like 1900, 1910, 1920, after it was kicking off in the 1880s, it was predominantly Muslim. So when you say it was a Jewish nation during that period, under Ottoman rule? No. Under the British Mandate? No, it was promised to multiple groups. If we're talking about Judea, okay, we're going back all the way to that thousands of years ago. That's one thing, but if we use that type of logic, I mean, what's America's rights to exist? I mean, historically, much more recent than when Judea and the thousands of years ago Jewish state that the Romans put down existed. There were native colonies, native lands from sea to shining sea in the United States. Much more recent. Would it be okay then for native communities and reservations to try a project of trying to buy up the land in, I don't know, Maryland or I don't know, Florida, of buy up land, buy up rental properties, kick everybody out, expel people from territories and gobble up land? I just need to understand the logic if he would apply it in any other scenario. I just couldn't imagine him applying this logic in any other scenario. Just like we were here 2,000 years ago, so we're going to make the country here now, whether you like it or not. I don't think he can tussle with it.
It literally means obliterate the modern state of Israel because they hate Israel and they want to eliminate the only Jewish nation in the world that is racist and genocidal. Now, you asked earlier, would I ban that statement? No, I'd allow people to say it. Members of the squad have tweeted out from the river to the sea. But the answer, I'd allow them to say it, but I wouldn't sit there quietly. I'd point out that you are calling for, once again, the extermination of millions of Jews.
As I'm sure you know, though, in Likud's platform, it says, from the river to the sea, there will only be Israeli sovereignty. Are they suggesting genocide of all Palestinians? Of
course not.
Exactly. So if they're not, why is the other suggesting genocide?
Because that's what Hamas supports. I started yesterday morning.
But it's not just Hamas supporters who say from the river to the sea. This is not he's not holding the same standard. You see, it's because it's Israel. And I hate to say this, and I'm just going to be blunt. Ted Cruz comes from a part of the world, a part of the country in the United States where evangelicals dominate. And there's a deep love of Israel, not only from a we hate the terrorists together with you type of perspective, which really hyped up after 9/11, but also from a deep religious perspective, a biblical perspective. And because the Jews are God's chosen people, and because Israel is supposed to be the land for the Jews religiously, there's going to be a different standard that Israel's going to be held to. So when the Likud say, from here to here, this will all be Israel, that's okay. That's not a call for genocide. But from the river to the sea, that is a call for genocide. It's just going to be a different standard he's going to hold them to, both politically and ideologically. And what I mean is, I think ideologically, he's going to hold Israel. Personally, I do believe that's his personal belief. He's going to hold it to a different standard because it is God's chosen people. But I also think on top of that being his personal belief, if he wasn't to hold it to a different standard, and if he was to apply the same standard equally, and he was to ask these critical questions, if he was to start asking about, well, if targeting civilians by Hamas is bad, then what are we going to say about all those civilians that were killed during the border protests, or what are we going to say about the civilians that are getting lynched in the West Bank right now, civilians being targeted, being shot, 8-year-old boy recently, and a 15-year-old boy recently shot in the West Bank. What do we say about this? If he starts asking those questions politically, he's fucked. There's no way.
But that's just restating it. Like,
but hold on. Let me say, yesterday morning, I started the day by watching a 46-minute video.
Seems like a heavy
the
pivot.
Actual atrocities that Hamas
Heavy pivot.
and about 50 senators watched it. As you guys know, I do a podcast every week. It's called Verdict with Ted Cruz. I do it Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Today's podcast is all about that video. Because yesterday morning, and right about this time, I sat in a room and I watched 137 people be murdered. And most of the footage was taken from body cams or cell phones that the Hamas terrorists were carrying. And they were...
Dog, can I... Look, the footage is brutal. Footage is awful. But man, oh man, I gotta say, after watching so much combat footage in Ukraine, I just wish for all of the wars we got involved in, because I feel he feels this. I'm positive he genuinely was horrified by the footage he saw. Of course, any civilian getting murdered is horrifying. I wish we did this to all of our politicians before we sent any aid, or before we sent anything, is we sat them down and made them watch footage from the war zones, how it's going to be used, the type of injuries that it causes, stuff like that. Oh, it'd be fantastic. It'd be perfect. It would get them, I would be very, not only because I think it would bring the seriousness to them, it would bring the seriousness of what they're doing to them, but just gives them a better understanding of the conflict that they're, dedicating weapons and munitions to. But I really wish I saw the same passion for, all the footage that I'm seeing constantly out of Ukraine as well. I know this is me being selfish, I think, about the cause that I care about, but it's just, man, in a year and a half, will it be the same thing? Just everybody just doesn't give a fuck anymore about what's going on in Gaza? And am I going to have these same discussions with people who are concentrating on Palestine and Gaza? I'm going to be like, man, it sucks, doesn't it? Everybody losing attention. I hope not. Hopefully by then, though, the conflict will be over. It won't. The conflict generally will be over. The war might be over. The conflict won't be over.
Were gleefully murdering civilians. They were murdering women. They were murdering children. And look, Hamas, I got to say, the most disconcerting thing, I turned 53 in December. In 53 years of life on this planet, I've never had a day where I watched 137 people be murdered. That's what I did yesterday. And when you watch...
I would assume so. I'm sorry, just a weird quote. Never in my life had I sat down and watched 137 people be murdered before I sat down and watched 137 people be murdered. I'd hope not. Fucking creepy if he had been. It's like, this is the third time this week I saw 137 people be murdered. He's the last user of LiveLeak. He has the LiveLeak private server that was never taken down.
Watch people. The most disturbing thing was the joy, the glee from these terrorists. I'll tell you, there was a moment on the video where one of the Hamas terrorists called his parents, and the Israelis intercepted the call.
Mm-hmm. Right. And we've heard of this one, yeah.
And he calls his dad, first of all, and he says, "Dad, I killed 10 of them with my bare hands." And he's like so proud, and he's celebrating. 10, I killed 10. And he said, "I want to talk to Mom. Can I talk to Mom?"
Yeah.
And his mom gets on and he says, "I killed 10 Jews. I murdered them with my bare hands." And she begins crying with joy. The twisted hate. Can you imagine calling your mother in celebration that you just murdered 10 people and you're proud of it, and your mother is proud of you for doing it?
And I know Emily wants to get a question, but I just, on this point real briefly, whenever we've had critics of Israel on, we've kind of insisted that they condemn that, because while we disagree with a lot on the show, we also try to find kind of moral common ground. And
Mr. Delight, thank you so much for the tier 1 sub. Deacon Mayazo, thank you so much for the primer. I appreciate it.
Bankrupt man.
We can all agree that those types of atrocities need to be fully condemned. And with that in mind, I want to read to you a couple things that we've been hearing from the Israeli government. We've had Defense Minister Gallant. We will eliminate everything. An IDF spokesperson. Our focus is on damage, not on precision. Agriculture Minister Avi Dichter. We are now rolling out the Gaza Nakba. Gaza Nakba 2023. That's how it'll end. Israeli Heritage Minister Amahai Elihu said a nuclear bomb is, quote, one of the possibilities. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich. We need sterile zones in the West Bank. Israeli President Isaac Herzog. It's an entire nation out there that is responsible. This rhetoric about civilians not aware, not involved, it's absolutely not true. They could have risen up. They could have fought against that evil regime. Another former Knesset member, there is one and only solution, which is to completely destroy Gaza before invading it. I mean destruction, like what happened in Dresden and Hiroshima without nuclear weapons. Would you join us in condemning that as well?
So I condemn nothing that the Israeli government is doing. I stand with the people of Israel, and let me explain.
All of that Hiroshima's type destruction and death. Have we evolved nowhere past Curtis LeMay? Is this still like we're still in the Tokyo firebombing era of the Republican Party? Really? No movement whatsoever. Just fucking kill them all, huh? Jesus Christ. By God, fucking maniac. I condemn nothing that just looked at all those statements, every single one, listened to it in its entirety, and just said, bingo, big thumbs up. I swear to God, if Curtis LeMay was still around, for those of you who don't know, he was the person who organized the firebombing of Japan. The way he organized it was by testing firebombs in the middle of the desert and fake Japanese villages designed to be just like them, found the one that burnt them down the quickest, and then went down a list for the most populous cities all the way down, and all the major population centers, trying to burn every single one down to destroy the nation of Japan. And he even said after the war, I'd be a war criminal. That's Curtis LeMay. I genuinely believe, after hearing this type of shit, that Curtis LeMay would be allowed to run rough wild under a Ted Cruz administration. And I am just bringing this up because Ted Cruz does still have presidential ambitions. He still very much wants to be president. He's just waiting for another opportunity in the future. So I'm just going to emphasize this as much as possible. Could you imagine this man right here heading the president of the United States as a future Republican nominee for president? This man heading, being in charge of what the State Department does. We've evolved not at all.
There is a qualitative difference. The Israeli government does not target civilians. They target military targets. The Israeli government
Why are they
has
so bad at their targeting then? If they're killing so many
so they're
civilians?
actually not. They are.
So then they are targeting.
No, they're exceptionally good at. So for example, a couple of weeks ago, we had stories all over the.
Okay, what about the stuff that the IDF confirmed, like the bombing of that 12th century Orthodox church? That is something that the IDF admits to. Oopsie daisies, we were aiming for an HQ center. Turns out we hit this church, killed 12 people. Justin Amash, former Congressman Justin Amash, I met the man at LibertyCon. He lost family members in that strike. Like, that's not good targeting. They dropped 6,000 bombs in 6 days. That is more than an entire month's worth of bombing during the height of our bombing campaign against ISIS and Operation Inherent Resolve. And they did it in an area incredibly dense, full of 2.2 million people. That was more than a month, than a lot of the bombs. I mean, it was an unprecedented level of bombing and an unprecedented small length of time that has only continued to increase and continued to bombard. And we're getting stories like that Greek Orthodox Church. And we're getting other stories, unconfirmed, some confirmed. It's just statistically impossible for me to believe. They just magically got all those targets in the 48 to 72 hour time period after that attack happened. They just got all the targets perfect. They were able to get them all checked. I mean, okay, let's just keep going.
The world. That Israel bombed a hospital in Gaza and killed 500 Palestinians.
You know, there are American State Department workers that are stepping down because they're not being allowed to investigate Israel's actions in Gaza out of fear that they might discover that they have committed war crimes. And then by both international and U.S. law, we would be forced to stop our sales of weapons to them. And so to stop that process, that legal process from starting, from multiple pieces of legislation we already have, some recently updated, some from the 90s, we just refuse to review how they're using the weapons. And we've had people step down during this crisis over that.
Now, it turns out that was a blatant lie. It was Hamas propaganda. And if you break down literally every element of the story was a lie. So, number one, Israel doesn't target hospitals.
Why have so many hospitals been targeted?
Because they haven't. Because it's false.
Who blew them up?
Hold on. Let's actually look at the facts. So, Israel uses precision-guided munitions. They don't target hospitals. What ended up, we discovered was the case, was the hospital. It was not an Israeli missile that took it out. It was...
What do you mean they don't target hospitals? Didn't they just attack Al-Shifa Hospital? I mean, well, I don't know what he means by target. Like, they don't bomb them? I'm pretty sure they have bombed hospitals before. It's just that what they would say is that the hospital is being used by Hamas.
Was a rocket from, it actually wasn't Hamas, it was Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And you got to understand, the terrorists in Gaza, they fire thousands of rockets. They have no guidance systems on them. So they literally put rockets. The rockets have some propulsion. They have an explosive. They have typically ball bearings or nails or something designed to kill as many people as possible. And they fire them in the general direction of Israel. But they can't steer them. Once they fire them, and about 20% of them end up hitting Gaza. So it's the terrorists that are actually bombing Gaza. So it was a terrorist missile that hit, but number one, it wasn't from Israel. Number two, it didn't hit the hospital, it hit the parking lot. Number three, 500 people were not killed. All of that was a lie, and yet what happened, and I talk about this in the book.
But that's
journalism. But look, so I can tell you there is no military on the face of the planet, including the U.S. military, that goes to the lengths that the Israeli military does to avoid civilian casualties. So I'll give you...
Give me a fucking break. What is it in the Trump era that it can't be even like, yes, they abide by international standards. And in the Trump era, it's always, number one, they're the best in everyone agrees, number one in every category. And so it can't just be, well, Israel is abiding by general Western standard, or some like bland response. Has to be, no, they're better than all the Western military. Honestly, I think we're barbarians in comparison to the Israelis.
Focus is on damage, not on precision.
Yes,
we
damage
keep
to
hearing
Hamas, damage to Hamas, to terrorists, and I am all for.
They have said the opposite. They keep saying that what they're doing is what they're intending to do, and here in the United States, we say that's not what they're doing.
That's simply not true. They are targeting the terrorists.
Are they
lying? No, my focus is on damage. Good, damage Hamas. I want to utterly eliminate Hamas. And I'll tell you something Israel does, for example. So why are there Palestinian civilian casualties? The reason is because Hamas uses human shields. Hamas wants Palestinians killed. Look, you look at the Hamas headquarters, it's in the basement of a hospital. They put it in the basement of a hospital. Why?
But they didn't find it there.
They put it there because they want Palestinian mothers, children killed. They put missiles in kindergartens. And the reason is, it's part of, on my podcast, I did an entire podcast that was entitled CNN is Hamas's Air Force. So is MSNBC, so is ABC.
What?
And I went through about a dozen stories where the corporate media just repeated Hamas propaganda. And look, Hamas is not strong.
fucking Don Lemon in an F-16. This is for Palestine, free Palestine. What does that even mean? They're their Air Force? He say like they're their propaganda arm or something like that. At least I would understand what he's trying to get at. What does Air Force mean?
Strong enough to defeat Israel? but they're counting on the useful idiots in the media amplifying their messages. So I'll tell you something that the IDF does. So, for example, if there's a building that they know they're Hamas terrorists in, they will drop initially what are called dud bombs. They'll drop a bomb on the top.
They've done this in previous wars.
That doesn't have an explosive, and the dud bomb will thud on the roof. And they do it to tell the civilians, get out.
The effectiveness of these things are debated. A lot of times people are confused. If it's areas being heavily bombed, hearing a dud, some people don't understand what's going on when the dud hits. A lot of times when the dud hits, they don't know like how long the bomb is until, you know, it falls. There's general problems with the dudding. I don't know if I want to call it the dudding process. With the dud bomb process that makes it still debatable exactly how many civilians it saved. But I don't think it's impossible to believe that it has saved civilians before, but I don't think it's, I'm definitely not confident in saying that it's a surefire way in protecting civilians when taking down like a 12-story apartment building. I mean, like if there's like 10 bombs going off and then you hear like a thunk, like, are you going to make the call? Like, oh, that's a dud bomb to tell us to get out. Or are you going to be like, oh, what was that? Oh, everything's getting bombed. It's just, it's not surefire way.
Out. They also, by the way, they have every cell phone in Gaza, so they will text civilians, leave. By the way, when Palestinians...
Dylan, why don't you project something funny on the old TV behind me? I will. That's why we have it there, but I don't have the piece for it yet. It should get here tomorrow. Tomorrow morning, I should be getting the piece necessary. So I'm just going to have my logo spinning. Maybe then we'll have funny things on it. But I wanted an old CRTV because, you know, we're in an attic. I'm not going to play into our production value. I'm going to play into the fact we don't have much production value.
Civilians try to leave. Hamas keeps them.
But also, donate. DylanBurns.tv. I'm back in the States. I'm editing my documentaries. We have 3 long ones I want to release. The more funds you make available to me, the better the documentaries can be. I appreciate it. DylanBurns.tv. Going to be heading back to Ukraine next year in March.
Corrupt, bankrupt.
Hey, thank you, Evil City, for the primer. Where are you currently in the U.S.? Yep, I'm back in the great state of Maryland. Happy to be back.
There. They want Palestinians to die because it is useful for propaganda. There's no military. By the way, the U.S. military, when we're attacking our enemies, we don't drop dud bombs telling people to evacuate. It's only the IDF that does that.
And so on that note, because we have to wrap, hot conflict now in the Middle East again. Is it time to endorse Donald Trump, negotiator of the Abraham Accords?
Look, I will say, President Trump, we had peace in the Middle East, and Joe Biden inherited peace and prosperity.
We did not have peace in the Middle East. Donald Trump shipped weapons to the Saudis, which were then used to bomb the Houthis in Yemen. The civil war between the Houthis and Yemen continued for the entirety of Donald Trump's term with no attempt by him to stop it because he had a tough on Iran stance and he wanted to display that through showering the Saudis in money and weapons that they then used to bomb. Well, not showering them in money, but showering them in weapons that they then used to bomb the Houthis. We also had the continuation of the Syrian civil war. We also had the continuation of Operation Inherent Resolve, which he flip-flopped on constantly, which also started a Turkish invasion of northeastern Syria against the SDF, which was a disaster on his watch. Yeah, no, we do not have peace in the Middle East. Not to mention, we were still in Afghanistan fighting ISIS and the Taliban, even if negotiations were going on. Well, I think the Taliban stuff stopped towards the end. We were still fighting ISIS there. What do you mean peace in the Middle East in his term? I don't know. I think what they mean is Donald Trump's stepson, his nerdy pencil-necked geek stepson, went to the Middle East, had these accords, and were able to help normalize relations with Morocco and a few other Middle Eastern countries with Israel. But there was also not an ongoing war between these states and Israel. So I don't know why we call that peace in the Middle East. I think it's just gassing Trump up, to be honest.
And he utterly screwed it up. We went from peace and prosperity. We now have 2 wars. We have the biggest war in Europe since World War II. We have the worst war in the Middle East in over 50 years.
Yeah, and which party is making it incredibly difficult for the Ukrainians to win the largest war in Europe since World War II, and for them to get the supplies necessary to defend themselves? It's hard for me to listen to any Republican lecture on this at this point, considering how much they've let their party get out of control on this issue.
And it's because having a weak and ineffective commander-in-chief is a train wreck. It doesn't work. And so, listen, we're wrapping up, but I do want to encourage our viewers. The book is designed number one, it's interesting and fun. It's filled with stories. It's not some abstract academic work. It's an interesting read. I want to encourage folks right now today, pull out your phone, go online, go to Amazon, go to Barnes & Noble, go to Books A Million, buy the book. And I'll say this, look, Christmas time is coming. So I'm going to encourage you, buy more than one. And in particular, it makes a great Christmas present.
Buy one for Ryan.
That's right.
Yeah, look. I mean, literally, buy one for your mom, buy one for your best friend, buy one for your
Okay, we get it. Man. Look, I don't like Trump. I think Trump poses a unique danger to the democratic foundations of our country. But once he's gone, whether he croaks or goes to prison or loses the election and, Doomer's out, I don't know, man, gets back into coke, whatever happens, the post-Trump era Republican Party is still going to be a shit show.